Alright, peace and greetings, YouTubers. Ben Carson, you tried it. And I've been meaning to get Ben Carson for a good minute, for a really good minute. But you know what? I kept letting him slide. Mainly because I feel like he's not all together upstairs anymore. Like, I feel like something happened to him and he's just never been the same mentally. So I didn't really want to drag him on his channel because I felt like it would be like bullying. But you know what? Listen, Ben, you doing too much. Like, I really think they did something to this man. I know he was a surgeon. I don't know if they put morphine in his Sprite one day on the lunch break when he was still a doctor and it just messed up something. I don't know if him and his wife got in an argument and she got annoyed because he talks too slow, so she pushed him down the stairs, but he survived. I don't know what the issue is, but Ben has been on some stuff. He's been saying a whole bunch of off-the-wall stuff as of late. I remember he made the whole correlation between the Affordable Care Act and slavery. Somehow he tried to make those two things correlate. And I even remember when he was running for president, and he said that nonsense about the pyramids in Egypt were for storing corn. And I'm like, sir, you are at the Republican national debate. You're trying to be the Republican nominee. Why are you talking about corn in the pyramids? That's not going to help anybody want to vote for you for anything. And then the other thing I started thinking about, like, wait a minute, why are they storing corn in the pyramids? You're really going to sit here and tell me that the whole pyramid was just filled with nothing but corn? And I'm like, Egypt doesn't even really have a winter, mainly because they're not too far from the equator and they're also a very, very elevated country, so the sun is beaming directly down, which means that the temperature is always a lot more, it's a little bit hotter over there. They have a very warm climate over there. Even during their winters, it's like 50 degrees. That's winter, it's 50 degrees. They might have a day where it's 30 every now and then, but winter is like 50 and 60 degrees. So there's not a winter, so there wouldn't be a reason to store corn in the pyramids because you can grow corn all year. And to be honest, I hope that wouldn't have been the only thing that they were eating. Like, he just made it seem as if the winter months came and everybody went into the pyramids and stayed and slept there and they lived off corn until the spring equinox. And I'm like, hell, you can't even really digest corn. That's probably why King Tut died at 19 if that's the case. Anyway, so long story short, getting back to my point, he was at an event and he was just talking about the United States and the history of immigration and prosperity and the American dream. And just as I got on Betsy DeVos, or DeVos, or Dividend, or Belle Biv DeVoe, whatever her last name is, as I said in the last video, the news anchors change her last name every single time I watch the news, so I'm going to change her last name every time I make a video and mention her name. But in my last video, I criticized her because, once again, she was an example of somebody who takes elements of history and they change the narrative to fit a specific lens in which they would like to see it. And then on top of that, they go and spread it and teach it to someone else, and it's wrong. And what happens is it warps history, and it makes a very dangerous environment because things that have been ill that have happened in the past can happen again if people aren't informed about what has happened in the past to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so I had to say my 2 cents about her and her definition of why HBCUs were created, and now I got to get on Ben Carson about his elements of immigration. And so he's at this event, and he starts talking about America, and he talks slow, so America was up. I was like, I don't have time, Ben, wrap it up, spit it out. Like, something about people talking too slow drives me crazy. I know I talk really fast, but look, life is too short. I don't have all day to be waiting for you to spend 8 hours to say 3 words. You know what? Ben Carson, when he talks, and I'm going to get back to the point, but I don't know if you've ever seen Tyler Perry's The Have and Have-Nots, but literally watching Ben Carson talk is like watching an episode of that show. Because on that show, there's literally 9 words in the whole episode. But they stretched this episode out to be an hour because everybody talked extremely slow. If you've ever watched that show on OWN, this is what it's like. Here's one of the characters will be like, what are you doing? Then it goes to the next person. Thinking. Then it goes back to the other person. About what? You know what. Don't you what me. You know what it is. If I knew, I wouldn't ask. And then you're just sitting here like, what in the hell? Can we get to the show? And before you know it, an hour's passed. So I had to stop watching that. I just watched This Is Us because I like that show. At least they got like 9 storylines going at the same time. That's something that can keep my crazy mind stimulated. But anyway, going back to the point. So Ben Carson is doing his whole thing about America and the dream. And it's always really funny when you watch people who are extremely patriotic talk about anything referencing the United States when it comes to history. Because what they do is every single time, they take out all the bad and they put in all the good, and they add some extra good and some sprinkles and some treats, and before you know it, the history of America is, The angels fell, no, they didn't fall because I forgot this is the history of America. The angels flew and glided from the sky and landed down, and they created a place called America, and the people were so happy, and all of the people would fly to Seattle, and they would stand and inhale the clean air, and anybody who had asthma, their asthma would disappear, and then they would go across to New York, and they would drink out of the Hudson River, and they would get rid of their diabetes. Like, that's literally how people who are extremely patriotic always talk about the country, and I just be looking like, okay. So he's doing his whole patriotic thing, and so he gets on the element. He says, slavery, or those who were enslaved, basically, they were immigrants too, and they immigrated here, and they had to work a little bit harder too. And I was like, what? Slaves were immigrants. First of all, let's go back to immigration. First of all, slavery is not a voluntary service. At least chattel slavery in the United States was not, unless you were from Ireland. I know people always try to correlate the enslavement of those who were Irish with those who were African and try to make them the same. No, they were two different planes, because if you were Irish and you signed up to be an indentured servant or signed up to be a slave, which you actually were not going to be locked down for life in, you did it by choice. It wasn't the case for all of them, but when you're talking about history, the biggest difference was the Irish were not snatched up and dragged on the bottom of the boat and whooped and dragged over here and forced to do anything. They came here by free will, because one, they were trying to, the story goes on and on, but to my main point, they're not the same thing. But anyway, going back to immigration, when you immigrate, you're coming by choice, okay? It means, you know what? Life is great, but I think life would be better if we went here. So we're going to pack up the kids, we're going to put them all in the Winnebago, and we're just going to go and hit the road. Or we're going to get on that plane, we're going to get on the 747, we're going to go. Or we're going to get on that ship, and we're going to praise not the Titanic, and we're going to go. That's what it was. And so when you talk about slavery, slavery was involuntary. It was, get your ass on the ship or die. What do you want to do? So either I'm going to kill you in your country, or we're going to snatch you up, and then you're going to have the worst experience in life. And you'll probably die on the way before you even get there. But if you do make it, we have more help for you when you get there. And you'll probably die within your first year because of diseases and everything else. But if you live after that first year, that means you're strong. So we're going to work even harder. Okay, so that was slavery. That wasn't anything voluntary. And then the only other option of being in a position where you go from one place to another is if you are in a refugee situation. Your country, something's going down, you have to escape, you have to flee, and now you're going to someplace new for your own liberty and for your own safety and to protect your own family. Those are the main three things. It's immigration, slavery / human trafficking, because that's pretty much what slavery is today, or you're under this whole refugee bubble. Those are the three. So I don't know what Ben Carson was talking about. But to make it worse, because I forgot, Ben always goes on a roll, he kept going, and then he said, and to those who were slaves, they had a dream and a vision that, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they would have prosperity in America. And I'm like, well, honestly, I don't think that would have been the case, especially for the first and second generation demographic, or the first and second generation slaves. I don't like saying the word slaves. I really hate saying that word. But those who were enslaved, that first and second generation who first came over from across the water, I highly doubt that their main goal was, I want to stay in this miserable place that I didn't ask to come to, and I want to have children, and I want them to be great. Those people were trying to get back to their families and everything that they knew at home. They had their own religions, their own cultures, their own customs, their own practices, their own everything. And so why would they want to stay in a place that they didn't ask to come to and have a family and hope that their family would be successful in that place? They wanted their family, and they wanted everybody to go back home, which is why this is where history gets interesting, which is why you started to have the element of white and black in this country. Because the first thing is, those who were slave owners started recognizing, okay, this first breed of enslaved people that are coming in, they're out of control. They're fighting back. They're speaking in these languages we don't understand. They're trying to act like they don't know what we're talking about. They don't want to do no work. And then when they get together and start talking, I feel like they're trying to kill me in my sleep. They're planning stuff, and I don't know what they're saying because I don't understand the language. We need to strip all that. So this is when they started snatching the languages. They started snatching the religions. They started snatching all the different practices. And you weren't even allowed to do all these different things. And they basically stripped them of everything they ever were internally until they became walking social constructs that only had one purpose, which was to work. And once they were able to do that, then those generations had more generations and more generations. And before you know it, in comes the development of what you call the modern day Black American, where now their entire culture is stripped and they've had no choice but to assimilate within the mainstream culture of the United States. And that's kind of where we are today. And so there wasn't going to be an idea of those first or those second or third generations of people coming from Africa wanting prosperity for their families here because they wanted to go back home. But by the time we got to that fourth and that fifth generation, this is all they knew. America is all they knew. So of course they want to be prosperous. But so I don't know exactly what he's talking about, but Ben, get that together. And so he keeps going and he's talking about, America was such a big country, and it was the only country in the world that could take all of the immigrants to this happy place. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait, blah, 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 blah. Even if I take blackness out of it, and let's pause on slavery. Let's just talk about white people for a second. I'm gonna just pretend there's not even a thing of slavery for like 5 seconds. All right, now I'm doing the Bessie DeVoe thing. But okay, if you want to talk about immigration in the United States amongst people who were European American, even that wasn't that great of a time because all of them were beefing and fighting. Okay, so when you get to the time period, especially between about 1890 going to about 1920-ish, all right, and maybe even closer to 1930, right before the Great Depression started. I mean, people were flocking here by the shipload, coming all over, coming from all different parts of Europe. They're coming from Poland, Germany, Austria, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands. Great Britain, they were coming from everywhere. And I mean, they were coming in at such high rates that it was making a major impact on the direct areas in which there were large ports where people could come into. So places like New York, places like Boston, Philly, like a bunch of different places had these really, really high populations of immigrants, especially in like New York City. And it was to the point where during that time period, if you were a student in school, 3 out of your 4 classmates were an immigrant from another country. And so what was happening was there was starting to be a culture clash because I was going to say the original residents, but I don't want to change history. So those first generations who came to the United States and killed off all the Native Americans and kept pushing them out further west, that first generation and that second and third who were comfortable and had got established, and their grandparents might have been a part of Jamestown or Roanoke and everything, and now they have some history here. There are people who have been here for 60 or 70 or maybe 100 years and everything like that. That demographic had a beef with the demographic who was coming in on the ships. And the funniest part was they were from the same place. That same demographic of people who had been in America for like the last 100 years also were from Poland and from Austria and Sweden and Italy and Germany and Switzerland and Portugal and all these different places. They were from the same place. And so now let me bring blackness back into it, because at this point slavery isn't ended. It's the 1900s or late 1800s. All right, slavery isn't ended. So this is what happened. All right, you have this new country, and there's all this new money to be given. Mind you, at this point, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers are snatching up everything. So little did we know we were slowly all becoming working class. But long story short, you have 3 groups competing for jobs and resources. You have the established Americans who have been here for about a good century. You have the immigrants who are coming in, and you have this demographic of 4 million freed black people who are no longer slaves, and they're all fighting for jobs. And what was happening is you had this demographic of free slaves who have all these high skills, because the only jobs they could do were skilled jobs. They knew agriculture, they knew mechanical work, they knew how to do all these different things when it came to construction and infrastructure and all these sewing and clothing and food and all this other crazy stuff. And so they were outperforming a lot of people. And so the established Americans recognized that the only way we're going to be able to compete in this country, because some of us haven't really had to do anything while we were here, everybody did it for us, and that wasn't everybody, because there were a lot of working class, white, poor Americans that did not own slaves, but, they're like, in order for us to make it in this country, we're going to need numbers. So this is where the element of whiteness came up, because now, rather than everybody thinking as nationalists from where they came from, because initially, even though America was America, a lot of people still, they recognized and they established basically colonies of the countries in which they came from. So there was little Italy, there was little Austria, there was little Germany. So everybody was, I'm German, I'm Irish, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm that. It wasn't going to be, I'm white, because white didn't really exist yet. I mean, it existed, but not in the way that it exists in America today. And so what happened is, The established Americans decided that we need to align with these immigrants who are coming in, and we need to establish the identity of whiteness, because if we work together and we start influencing policy and putting in legislation and things like that, we have political power, we have generational wealth, we have opportunities. We are basically the heart and the narrative of this specific country, and the country is seen through the lens in which we see the world. And if we have that kind of power, we can keep these jobs, and those people over there, they're going to need to stay in the South. They're going to need to be sharecroppers. They're going to need to do work that we're not going to do, because we outnumber them and we overpower them. And so that was one element of immigration. So it wasn't always a great thing. And another thing is, as people were coming into the country, they were coming and settling in different regions for various reasons. So if you were going to the state of Georgia when you first came here, it was probably because you were a convict and you weren't allowed to go to other places. So it's like, oh, you're not coming up in here to Quaker country, not no Pennsylvania. You need to go down there to Georgia where it's 109 degrees all year during the summer and the spring, and you go live over there. And it's so funny because I felt bad for anybody who was enslaved, because it was like, dang, one, you got to be a slave, but you also got to be, you know, it's going to be the convicts that's going to be in charge over there. They're going to be running the show. So you guys have fun down there. And so there were a bunch of different issues that were going on at the same time. As a matter of fact, you also had everything going on with the Louisiana Purchase, and then you had us getting ready to acquire, I think at this point we've already acquired Mexico, so now you have parts of California and Arizona and New Mexico and all these other areas, and Texas, that are now America. So yeah, those black people and the Mexicans, we don't want them taking our jobs. So we're going to bunch together, all of us established Americans and all you Europeans who are coming in, and we're going to align ourselves, and we're going to make the element of white. And with this, we can run this country. And the Mexicans and the black people, we're going to keep them to a certain, they're going to stay in a certain lane. You know, a few of them will make it out of the cracks and be successful, but from a structural standpoint and from a systematic standpoint, we run the shots. And you fast forward a few hundred years to 2017, it's the same thing. But anyway, that's my video. Subscribe. Ben Carson, as I said, you tried it. I don't understand why you would go against your own history to try to appease people. Your white appreciation certificate will not come in the mail. I know you got your cabinet position. Kudos, I guess. But, yeah. You tried it. Anyway, I'm out. Subscribe.